with a reporter who is helping to break the biggest story in human history. This is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Before we do the thing, briefly, I'd like to thank my patrons and friends who've helped me keep the show afloat. Without the help you provide, the dual injection of financial support and genuine friendship, I wouldn't have this amazing opportunity to interview the legendary author and journalist Leslie Kean. This past year has been challenging for me and my family. What was once my home PBS station had to shutter its news department due to federal budget cuts, the doom of Doge, so I lost my longtime position as a news reporter. It was a major life change, one that forced me over time to confront my own ambitions and surrender an outgrown identity. Thus, instead of pounding the pavement to find another anonymous job counting widgets in a fudge factory, I made this show my life's work. Since then, I've been angling to attract a courageous cadre of patrons and supporters to help me keep these interviews coming, to further my own journey toward deeper insights and help others do the same. That group is now real, and that group is growing. I have gratitude. They're making the difference right now between James the Seeker and James the Automaton. Together, we're working to normalize the extraordinary. So if you'd like to join our little community and help us continue these sorts of exploratory conversations on UAP, non-human intelligence, and consciousness as a primary force of nature, go to patreon.com/neongalactic and sign up. You'll receive early release interviews, articles, exclusive content, and access to a dynamic and spirited Discord discussion. We're building a temple there, one interview, one story at a time, and we value your experience. We need your perspective and opinion to help unmask an emerging umwelt that may, in the end, help save humanity from itself. With big plans in the works, every human counts in our ongoing effort to crack the universe wide open. Now, the interview. When the dust settles on this strange era in history and humanity finally fully reckons with the consequences of disclosure, few names will loom larger than Leslie Kean's in that accounting. She's the psychopomp and midwife of this strange new era of unlikely truths and existential questions, as reality finally breaks free of its cage. Her career bookends the modern era of ufology, launching like a flare with her early coverage of the French COMETA report, publication of UFOs and Generals, her 2007 presentation of witness testimony at the Washington, D.C. Press Club, the explosive December 2017 story in the New York Times, the advent of Lou Elizondo, the emergence of David Grush, and more. Her bona fides drew serious eyes to a once disdained discussion, and the rigor of her reporting keeps them glued to the unraveling spectacle. Kean is arguably the most consequential civilian champion of UAP disclosure, together with the revised view of human consciousness that follows in its wake. With 2 books and 2 separate Netflix series to her credit, her work is breaking through to ignite a discussion long overdue. And since she's lately moved from nuts and bolts reporting on machines in the sky to an exploration of consciousness and even the possibilities of life after death, the stakes couldn't be higher. One constant that shines through in her work is credibility. By cultivating a vast array of sources from every exotic corner of government, industry, academia, and the public, Kean has punched a path through the tangled maze of secrecy to finally shine a blistering light on the biggest secret ever kept from humanity at large. She is a change agent, an advocate for clarity, and an old-fashioned gumshoe reporter at a time when truth grows frail from disuse and liberty hangs in the balance. So, how does she read this current moment? At the dawning of 2026, with so much accomplished and so much left to do in the process of mainstreaming this traditionally fringe subject, how does she rate our progress? We explore the frontiers of this subject and of our own minds with a guest I have been hoping to interview since I first started down this road. Welcome, Leslie.
Well, James, thank you. I mean, that was an absolutely beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be with you today. And
Yeah.
yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. Like I said, it's an honor. I should say that today's my 50th birthday. So, January 7th, I'm a Capricorn, and I couldn't imagine a better birthday gift than to have time to speak with you today. So, thank
I'm
you
so
for.
happy to be, I'm honored to be part of your birthday, James. Really.
It's 50
I
years,
hope
half
I
a
can
century, but
deliver.
you know.
Yeah, if I can deliver what makes this all worth it for you to do on your birthday.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we'll have an interesting time, I'm sure.
yeah. So I'd like to sort of start with, how you first, got into this subject. When you first thought about doing a UFO story, what were the circumstances, and did you ever imagine it would lead to, where you are right now?
Never, ever. And I never thought about doing a UFO story. You know, it
Yeah.
happened only because, as you mentioned earlier, the COMETA report, which should I assume your audience knows what that is,
No, go
or?
ahead and give a little bit of summary of what that
Okay,
was,
yeah.
because
I
yeah,
mean, what happened was I was a reporter working in a public radio station in California in 1999, and
Pacifica, right? A Pacifica station.
Pacifica,
Yeah,
KPFA radio in Berkeley, California, this very scrappy kind of grassrootsy, left-wing station. And but I was involved with one of the biggest shows there, investigative news show that was on every day, and it was a lot of work to get a
yeah.
story going every day. Um, and
Investigate story every day.
yeah, it was. I don't know. Yeah, it was. There were three producers, and we were all on air, and each of us had to do a segment, and the show was an hour, so each had maybe 20 minutes or so to do something every day. And in those days, you recorded it on reel-to-reel tape, and you cut it with razor blades to edit it. Literally, they were just beginning to get computers when I actually left the job. It was really wild, yeah, when you think about how much time it took just to edit your interviews.
Yeah,
Sometimes we did them live, sometimes they were pre-recorded, but
yeah.
anyway, to get to what we're discussing today, I had a colleague in France who just out of the blue sent me, and I had read a couple of UFO books prior to this, but I was curious and interested in the topic, one of them being Whitley Strieber's Communion. When it came
Mhm.
out, I was riveted by that.
Yeah,
Um, but I had no more of an interest in this than the average person who's curious and interested in the world around them, kind of thing, and interested in other realities and stuff.
yeah.
It never entered my professional world for a second. And so suddenly I got this report, which you referenced, the COMETA report, in the mail. It was a hard copy of an English translation. It was like this 90-page white paper that had been translated by Lawrence Rockefeller and this colleague of mine who ran this magazine in France. And it had come out already in France, but no one was really paying any attention to it. It just had been published in his magazine. And he said, hey, Lawrence Rockefeller translated this. You're the only journalist in America to have it. Would you like to do something with this? Excuse me. So I read it and I was completely blown away, James. I mean, this report was written by admirals, four-star generals. There was probably three admirals, a general, the chief of police from France, the former head of the equivalent of NASA in France,
Wow.
scientists. There's a very distinguished group of like 13 people who spent 3 years looking at all these official cases on UFOs. And in the report they had data on each case, maybe this half a page.
Mhm.
But what was incredible to me was the conclusion that they wrote in black and white in the report. And then they said that the most likely valid, rational explanation for these sightings is what they call the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And they were basically saying, we think we're being visited. Excuse me, I just got to get some water.
Yeah,
Um, and they presented cases which had enough data that you really could eliminate conventional explanations, right? That's what's important, because otherwise the door is always open. But they really zeroed in on very, very evidential cases, militaries, pilots, and things like that, where there's a lot
yeah,
of data.
yeah,
And there they just said it outright, and I was like, whoa, they really made a good argument for this. And I'd never seen anybody willing to say it at that level.
hmm
I mean, and I thought, imagine if the equivalent level of people in America stood up in a microphone at a press conference and made a statement like that. How huge that was, right?
hmm
These were, high level people. They were part of a military think tank in France. They weren't part of the government, but they were all retired, very high level people. So that's how it started for me, James. It was like, whoa, this seems to me like the biggest story out there.
yeah,
Because even if there was like a 5% chance that we were being visited by something from somewhere else, to me it was worth looking into. Just like
yeah,
with cancer research, right? If
yeah,
you're looking for a cure and there's a 1% chance it's going to work, you try, right?
yeah,
And so I just, that very day I read that thing, my mind just sort of opened like, whoa.
yeah,
And I did a bunch of research. I talked to various people, and then I wrote this story for the Boston Globe based on that report, which came out in May of 2000. And the only reason I was able to do that was because I already had a relationship with the editor of this section, the Sunday news analysis section of the Boston Globe. Because I reached out to a lot of papers who I'd previously reported for. I did a lot of freelance reporting in those days on various topics,
Yeah.
who liked my work, but they wouldn't touch this because it was so taboo in those days. It was a different world from today where the media wants stories now, right? It was so taboo and so ridiculed. And this one editor of the Boston Globe was willing to give it a shot because she respected my work. And it was quite a process to go through the editing with her and everything. I mean, it was just touch and go, whether it was even going to come out.
Yeah.
And so when that story came out in May of 2000, that changed my life, basically. And I began walking down this path of not only wanting to find out what this was about, but also just as important to me was, why was this so shunned? Why was nobody taking this seriously? Why was the government pretending it was something else? All the questions that other people have been looking into for decades, but it was all new to me at the time.
Yeah, it landed in your lap sort of all of a sudden.
I was hooked. And I couldn't do anything else. And I eventually left that job and devoted myself to this full time. And fortunately, I had the resources to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that, like, you read this report where you had these high-ranking and credible officials, saying the quiet part out loud. And it's been, I mean, you can almost look at your journey as a journalist on this subject as trying to get that same thing to happen in this country, to kind of get America to do its own COMETA report. And we've had the report that came out of the UAP task force, but that was more tepid, I think, than what the COMETA report was saying. I think the age of disclosure is probably the closest that's come so far to kind of having the people of that weight and gravitas in America make that same kind of claim. That's just interesting to me that over 20 years, it's like, just to sort of translate the conversation into, an American, context, it took that much work and that much effort.
Took a long time, and it's still unfolding. We're still not there. But I was, for 17 years, I worked within a world that was very different than the post 2017 world. I mean, there was nobody else doing mainstream print journalism. George Knapp was doing great work. He was on a television station in Las Vegas. There was occasionally stories that would come out within various local papers if there's something that happened in the area or something like that. But
sighting or whatever. Yeah,
nobody else was doing print in mainstream newspapers that went out on the wires and were picked up all over the place.
Major newspapers, like.
Yeah, well, the Boston Globe was the first one. Yeah. And in those days, they had something called the wires, which is sort of like the equivalent of the internet now, where the newspaper who prints your story puts it out for all the other papers to pick up. And they choose whether to do that or not. They don't do it with every story, but they did that with these stories, and they would end up in Canada, all over the country. And so they got a lot of exposure. But it was lonely, James. There was nobody else. People did not take the subject seriously, and except for the veteran investigators in the UFO world. But I was trying to get beyond that UFO world, that enclosed world, right? That was the whole point of doing this.
Exactly right. To break it open.
The Congress, to reach the policymakers, to reach the people that have a potential to really change things. And so that was my focus, was really. Every time I wrote an article, I would think, how would you say this to a member of Congress? So I was very careful.
Well, then that probably led to the press club presentation, because obviously Washington, D.C., that's in their context. Hopefully they will pay attention to that. I wonder, you had a lot of colleagues in the media. What was their response to seeing you sort of pivot from what you had been doing to sort of becoming a UFO reporter? Were they skeptical, or were they intrigued? Did you even have
my colleagues at KPFA Radio, when I first brought it up, were very scornful. So the whole time I was doing the Boston Globe piece, which was, I received this report, I think, in September, and the story didn't come out till May. So there was quite a period of time, maybe November, but there was a lot of months where I was working on it and looking into it. And I decided, I didn't say a word after the initial conversation I have with this producer I work with, who's a very good friend of mine and, respected me, but nobody at that station could take it seriously. So I didn't even talk about it.
Yeah.
Then once the story came out in the Boston Globe, it was a whole different ball game. They were like, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is serious stuff," and I was actually able to do my own special broadcast show on the radio station where I interviewed people on the topic. But it was only because of the Boston Globe story.
Yeah. Yeah.
The journalists will take that kind of reporting seriously. I didn't have a lot of colleagues then. I had only been, doing journalism for a few years before that. So the main ones are the ones at the radio station, and others out there. I mean, I think, as I said, because it was the Boston Globe,
Yeah.
people took it seriously. I didn't have a lot of problems personally over all the years I was doing this with getting ridiculed or getting attacked or anything like that. And I think it was because the way I wrote the stories, they were just so carefully crafted with the
Yeah.
absolute only credible voices, no anonymous sources, that kind of thing. No
Well, that's why
conclusions being drawn. Yeah.
you've made the progress you've made, I think, is because people can't attack the reporting. It's the facts are clear. What you want to do with those is a whole different question, and that's stirred a bunch of debate. But you have, by that kind of rigor, I think, has made this whole conversation possible in a lot of ways. So,
I
thank
was
you.
just very careful about that, very, very careful. And I had a lot of good guidance back when I was starting out about what kind of language to use, what not to use, all of that.
Yeah,
And and then there's nothing for people to ridicule when you do it right. You
exactly
know,
right.
I mean, the
Exactly.
crazy debunkers will say whatever they say. I mean, yeah, I think I remember one thing when my book came out in 2010. It was this NASA, I'm blanking out on his name, James, but it was a guy associated with NASA that everybody knew at the time. It was sort of a debunker. He made the claim that pilots were not reliable witnesses of events in the sky. I mean, he has this whole argument about that.
I had a congressman tell me that military folks were not reliable witnesses because he's like, they're all conservative Trump supporters, so they're all like, conspiracy minded.
Well, that wasn't true back before Trump came around, but
And it
I'm talking
wasn't
about
true
like
now even. I mean,
that's
that's just
craziness. They'll say
ridiculous.
whatever they want, but yeah, I remember having to argue with this one person about whether pilots were good witnesses or not, and he wrote a piece and I wrote a rebuttal that was published. I think it was on MSNBC's website. I forget, but it was so long ago. But and I was easily able to rebut that.
Hmm.
But I wasn't like people. I didn't get a lot of ridicule anyway, which I'm
Yeah.
grateful for. I'm really grateful for at the time. And that press conference too that you mentioned in 2007, which I did with James Fox,
Yeah.
is really, really worth watching. I think it's on YouTube if people haven't seen
It
it yet.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what led to the publication of my book in 2010. And we invited some of the COMETA related people to that press event. It was people from all over the world. So it just had this amazing flow for me and then eventually getting more and more connected with some of the insiders and people with clearances who operate more behind the scenes, who I started talking to after my book came out, and really learned a lot from them, a lot of off the record stuff, and people who are still in the field today. A lot of them were in the age of disclosure, those types of people.
Yeah.
And and so that's really what led to my being invited to the meeting that led to the 2017 story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's now you had a pretty close relationship with Bud Hopkins at one point, but that came after you published your Boston Globe story. Can you talk a little bit about his impact on your work and your worldview as you kind of encountered this space?
So yeah, very interesting question, James. I got to know Bud starting in around 2003, and I was very close to him until he died in 2011. In fact, I was with him at the moment he died. And I found the work he was doing absolutely fascinating. I mean, I was just something I kind of observed, his work. I got to know John Mack very well. I got to know David Jacobs as well, the three kind of leaders on the abduction thing. And they all had different perspectives. And it was just an interesting world to kind of swim in. And I was extremely curious about it, but it never impacted my professional reporting on the topic. I mean, there's no way that I could ever bring that into my reporting.
Yeah.
And I was very careful, that I kept it all separate. And Bud absolutely supported that. It wasn't
Yeah,
like he
good.
was saying, "Oh, I wish you could cover this." He
Pressuring you to
understood
do something.
completely, and
Yeah,
he thought what I was doing was really important, so he encouraged me to stay on that path. And so, it was only like a personal interest that I had, but it certainly affected my perceptions, absolutely, of what this, the largeness and the mystery of the phenomenon that clearly goes way beyond the nuts and bolts aspect. But
yeah,
I was working like at, kindergarten level, just trying to get the point out that the phenomenon is real based on the physical data that we have.
yeah,
The phenomenon is real. UFOs are real. Here's how we know it. Everything was nuts and bolts. And then it needs to be investigated. Those are the points I was trying to make. And obviously, you couldn't walk into a member of Congress's office and talk about abductions at that point. We weren't there yet. I
yeah,
just so that's why I had to make that compartmentalized kind of relationship to these different areas. But that was where my whole exposure to the experiencer side of this began, and it was incredibly impactful for me to be
yeah.
involved with that and to get to know people who had such experiences. I got to know some of them very well. One of them being Linda Cortila from the Witness case, who recently
Hmm.
died. She recently died. That case really interested me because there was so much evidence and multiple witnesses and all of that kind of thing that were involved. But so yeah, it just kind of enriched my whole perception of what this was about, and just brought up more and more questions for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like the posing of those questions, coupled with the fact that the people asking them are so brilliant, I mean, that's like the nut of it for me. It's like there's all these questions, there's all the phenomena that we can measure and the ways that we can tell that these things are really happening. And then you have some of the most brilliant people on the planet like taken up by it. So that is a process that for me at least, I slowly digested over time. And in the end, I ended up, 20 feet down a rabbit hole and unable to find my way out. But
Right? It happens
yeah,
because the more questions you ask, the deeper you go, and then the more questions come up, right? And
yeah,
there's
exactly.
no way out of it. There's no answers that resolve things.
Yeah.
Just kind of
And
swimming
from
in this world.
Yeah, and when you come from a background where, like, a liberal arts degree, everything is material, everything is, socio-political, the kind of like that's how I was trained and how I was brought up. It's really like they say, an ontological shock. It forces you to rearrange yourself. And I prefer, the universe I live in now to the one I was living in then. And it's all because of this subject and people who take that philosophical risk. So, people
I'm
like yourself.
I'm with you on that. Absolutely makes life
Yeah,
much more interesting. I
it
couldn't
does.
imagine having a life without this. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
So how do you think Bud would read this current moment? Part of like I kind of waffle back between being excited about where we are and then being frustrated with where we are. It's
Mhm.
like there's been a lot of progress, but at the same time there hasn't been that definitive change socially. I mean, I think that the conversation is okay now, or at least getting there, but like I don't think the bulk of people are convinced. Do you think he would be frustrated by that or just glad that there's been the progress? What are your thoughts on how he'd see it?
I think he'd be glad about the progress personally. I mean,
Sure.
I wish he were still here to see what had happened since 2017. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that a lot of the members of the experiencer community are frustrated because they are being left out of the narrative. But I think that Bud and John Mack and all of those guys would have been blown away by, and by all of this. But maybe I'm just projecting my own perceptions because I'm certainly much more focused on the progress than I am anything else. Because I spent 17 years in a different world, so to
Exactly
me,
right. Yeah, yeah.
unbelievably amazing what's happening. And one of the things I'm really interested in, James, is trying to find a way because, yeah, as I mentioned to you, in the beginning, I had to stick with just the kind of stuff that will appeal to the status quo, right?
Mhm.
The basics. And I'm still kind of have that approach, but I'm feeling like we've expanded our perception so much, even on the official level, since then, that one of the things I really want to try to do is find ways to bring the experiencer side of this and the more paranormal side of it into the mainstream dialogue in some way.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult still, but I made some statements about that at the Soul Foundation conference. I covered it
Yeah.
when we did our National Geographic series. which just to mention, you mentioned two series on Netflix, actually
Oh,
one on
that's right.
Netflix and one on National Geographic. That's okay.
Okay, my bad. Sorry about that.
No
All right.
problem.
Yes.
The National Geographic series in season two, we covered experiencers in two episodes, which
Mhm.
was, fairly radical thing to do. And we did it in a way I thought that was very credible. So I think that Bud and John and these wonderful pioneers would be, I think of that. I'm doing this for you partly when I do these things. This
Yeah, of
needs to
course.
find a way into the mainstream.
Yeah.
It's the whole broader aspect of it. And I'm really wanting to see that happen. I just can only do what I can do and what I think is going to work.
Exactly
So there
right.
may be some frustration from people about that. But it
Yeah.
takes a lot of patience. For people who have been involved with this for a long time, maybe they get frustrated, like you mentioned. But I don't get really frustrated because I'm so blown away by what's happened. Um,
Yeah.
so that's just my personal take on it.
No, and then I hear that, and I think that that's the you can't make a change that's this broad, I think, quickly. And I think that there's always going to be a progression where you start off with the low-hanging fruit in terms of what's going to grab the public's attention, what's easy to confirm, and then you can expand the conversation to include the things that are more, sort of harder for people to grok. And then eventually the whole thing will hopefully, descend into the public psyche. And that's, I think
Exactly right. And I think
and
it
we're sort
has
of in
to
that
be
process now.
gradual. Yeah, I really do think it
Yeah.
has to be a gradual unfolding. I really do. I think that's the way to do it. And so even though, like you said, it hasn't landed as a cultural shift or anything, it just has to gradually inch its way towards that, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening. So I'm pleased about that. I mean, there's just every year something you can put a peg on as being a step forward. And as you mentioned, the age of disclosure, I think that was a really, really great step and a really powerful movie, and I think it's made a difference. So we just keep going
Yep.
forward,
And,
right?
yep.
And
And
whatever we can do to get the experiencer is in there more. And I think the study that is being done by the John Mack Institute at Rice University, they're doing a metadata study of all these endless, thousands of pages of data they have from Whitley Strieber's collection, from John Mack's collection, and
exactly
elsewhere.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, and I've talked to Karen Austin about this, who heads that up, many times, is that could be what's going to change. Uh, what's going to really get that into the mainstream will be that study, because I have every intention of trying to report on it when it comes out.
Yeah.
And that could really shift things because that's a hardcore study of data.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
And you
just a
can
bunch
do
of
things
people
with it.
talking about weird
Yeah.
experiences they had. Yeah.
Yeah. Because people tend to look at it like there's a few people who have, odd people who have these weird experiences. But when you see the breadth of what's in the collection, which is, I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of people telling similar but different enough stories that you can't help but be, sort of confronted with the idea that there's something very real and bizarre going on. I mean, and that's going to be interesting to watch, especially as we kind of get better at AI, and kind of doing that kind of data analytics. I think that those things are going to kind of coalesce. To me, it almost seems orchestrated. I don't want to get conspiratorial or anything, but I mean, like the time. It all does all seem like there's so many threads that are moving forward at the same time that we're headed toward a moment where it's going to be irrefutable, and you got to wonder if that's by design. But
We'll see what happens. I mean, ultimately I sort of go along with the Jim Semivan arguments, is that it's really the phenomenon that's in control. If the
exactly.
phenomenon
Yeah.
wants disclosure, it could happen in two
Yeah.
seconds.
Yeah.
Uh, Clearly, that's not in the cards, and so I think it's probably better that it be a gradual acclimation.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. What do I know? But ultimately, it seems like, and I don't think necessarily an outright full disclosure. I don't think it's going to happen in anytime soon. But I also don't necessarily believe it would be a positive thing to just dump it all out on society all at once and
Yeah.
expect people
Exactly
to
right.
do that, and also not to be able to answer all the questions that would come up as a result of doing that. It's
Yeah.
understandable to me that why they don't want to do that. So
Yeah.
I think the best chance we have is to sort of gradually unfold it the way we are, the way so many people are. Yeah.
You've cultivated a lot of sources on the inside of this, discussion. can you, is there any kind of consistency in what they say as to why they're worried about what would overwhelm the public? I mean, that's, it's like Lou Elizondo's somber truth. There's something that's, he equated it to a cancer diagnosis. So that's, alarming. But then, like, yeah,
Yeah.
what are they worried about, do you think?
I don't know exactly because, obviously they've never shared any classified information with me. They clearly know more than any of us and they can't talk
Mm,
about it. But yeah, I get that sense from a number of sources I have that it's kind of ominous, and Lou even in his book writes about it in that way, right? About
yeah.
so I don't really have any insight into it other than, the phenomenon is obviously completely uh more, so much more powerful than we are. That basically it's in control. We're not the whole concept of not being at the top of the food chain, that it can basically do whatever it wants. And maybe, I mean, this is one theory I've heard proposed. I have no idea, that
Mhm.
since we are in the process of destroying our planet on an environmental level, plus geopolitically things are escalating and we're very warlike, and there may be some kind of serious events that unfold in the next years that are very dire for the planet. It may be that if the phenomenon is really in charge, we don't know what they're going to do when we get to a certain point of disaster.
Yeah.
Maybe they care about the resources in this planet. Maybe they don't care so much about us human beings. There's no way to know. I mean, again, this is 100% speculation. I don't want people.
Yeah.
I know something more that I'm not saying because I don't, because that's been a problem for me in the past when I've made any statements like this. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
anything beyond what I'm actually saying. I really don't. I
Yeah.
just know that there, like James says, there's a sense of kind of ominous quality to what these people see coming along in the future, possibly. And
Mhm.
I can't imagine that it's not connected with the way our planet is moving along. It is not
Especially
moving.
given the messaging coming from NHI over and over and over again, and with experiencers. A lot of
Right.
times it has to do with environmental issues, so that seems like it's high on their mind.
It's definitely, and it's understandable. I mean, and then there's the whole theory that perhaps many of the species don't aren't extraterrestrial, they're ultra-terrestrial. They might inhabit our planet in some way under the
So then
oceans.
it really matters.
That
Yeah.
really matters. I mean, they're not just flying in from some distant planet. They're here all the time. They've been here
Yeah.
longer than we have, is my sense. They
Hmm.
obviously have some connection to planet Earth. We don't really know. But, and you're right, messages have been given consistently over decades to experiencers that we need to take care of our planet, and we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And even, now I think even less, given the way the Trump administration approaches climate and environment is obviously not in a positive way in the way we're talking about. So I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with what these people are concerned about. That somehow the NHI may play a role eventually if things get bad enough.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. And again, I don't know anything about that. That's
Yeah.
just my sense.
Well, I think that you could argue that when they've interfered with nuclear technology, like at the Minot Air Force Base and all of those places, it was a demonstration of if we want to, we can swat the toy out of your hand, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if it may not just be nukes that they're concerned about, it may be all the other issues that we're sort of slowly, causing on this planet, which may cause an intervention.
Yeah, that's the point. I don't know, and I don't know if that's what these people are implying, but they certainly have been briefed about concerns like this in a classified setting, and they can't talk about it. But it's clear to me that they have been briefed about this kind of thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be saying, Jim Semivan's another one, Lou Elizondo, others. I think Carl Nell has a sense
Mhm.
that the future could be pretty intense. So who knows?
Yeah,
I don't
we
know.
just gotta.
We just have to do the best we can and keep going. Um, so I don't know what to make of it all. I don't know
Yeah,
anything more than anybody else who studies the topic.
yeah. It's interesting to me. There's a couple things I wonder about with all of this. You've Started to talk more and more about consciousness. You wrote a book about the possibility of life after death, and there's this sort of intersection that happens between what people used to consider the spiritual and what is the NHI, right? Like that kind of the other. So, I mean, sometimes I wonder if there is a physical other that we're dealing with, but then there's also sort of a realm that we're also encountering, or if it's the same thing and maybe they're related. But I'm wondering, I know that you had a background in Buddhism, and
Yeah.
that you went to Burma and did some really valuable reporting work there. And I think that that's where you sort of became interested in Buddhism. I'm wondering, how does that prepare you for these considerations of consciousness around the phenomenon? Are you still interested in sort of non-dualism, and how does that inform your thinking around all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question, James. I actually began practicing Buddhism when I was in college. Sorry about this. So it was long before I got involved with going to Burma, which was absolutely a wonderful thing for me to witness how the Buddhist perspective was actually integrated into the political system in Burma. It was so well integrated into the culture and everything. But yes, my practice of Buddhism, which began, when I was 19,
Okay.
was sort of focused on, the whole you're asking question, basically the simple question about who I really am and what is this world? What is reality, basically, right?
Yeah.
What is,
Yeah.
and how much can we see beyond the physical senses? And so that was sort of a deep question that stayed with me even when I wasn't formally practicing Buddhism. And it definitely was in the background of my interest in UFOs because it's pointing to another reality that is not part of what we accept as real, right? But it is real. And
Yeah.
so it's all sort of this deep inquiry for me that I was able to bring into my journalism. It has had a personal connection in the way you're describing. And even that's also for the book Surviving Death, where I was looking at all this kind of studies and evidence for the possibility of consciousness surviving the death of the body. And it was from all these different research areas that all
Mhm.
kind of pointed towards the same thing. Um, but it's interesting, James, when I wrote that book, I had no concept of the UFO phenomenon being in any way related to what I was writing about in Surviving Death,
Yeah.
which I find now to be kind of amusing. I just didn't, I saw them as completely separate. And it was only after that book came out that I started to hear more discussion and pay more attention to and think more about the connection among all these different phenomena, especially when you become more involved with the experiential element of the UFO phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, clearly what you're saying is true. There's some kind of overlap, there's some kind of connection that consciousness seems to play a major role in UFO encounters. It's impacted by them, it sometimes helps probably create them. Um, Maybe there is some kind of realm, like you said,
Hmm.
another dimension, for lack of a better word, where all of these things kind of dwell. I mean, I don't know the answer. I just have a gut sense um, from pulling together all the things I read and people I talk to as a stuff that it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
I think everybody kind of sees that now. I don't,
Exactly. It's becoming more
yeah,
apparent as we get deeper, you know?
yeah, and I just don't feel competent in trying to say how they're connected, or I don't think anyone really has the answers to that.
Yeah.
But it's the role of human consciousness that seems a big part of it. Um, and yeah, the similar aspects that sightings might have to near-death experiences, or qualities that kind of permeate all of it.
Yeah.
The way the UFOs can, just sort of come in as if through a portal and then go out again. All these.
And the
It's
way it
just
transforms witnesses, both of those events seem to like kick off it's sort of like an initiation where you're left in a different state than you were before it happened, and it transforms your direction in life in a profound
so
way, you know?
so true, and it gives you a sense of. I mean, I think even people with UFO encounters. I mean, Whitley Strieber has written about the fact that sometimes in a ship they'll see a deceased person that or something like that, or somebody in a near-death experience will see someone that looks like a gray alien, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so what does all that mean? I don't know, but there's obviously some kind of overlap, and like you say, the way it impacts people is a big part of it. Absolutely, all of them are life-changing, all of them are transformative. And maybe even some of the UFO encounters affect people's perception of what happens after death, because they realize the energetic factor of who we are, that we're way more than just the physical.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm an explorer like everybody. I mean, I think in the book I was much more focused on bringing in sort of data and studies and stories from
Mhm.
different people. I mean, in my own experience with all of this,
Yeah.
but I don't have answers as to how it all intersects, and it's just
Yeah.
fascinating to me. That is, to me, one of the most fascinating questions out there, is how that
Exactly. It's
works. What is the enmesh? How does it all enmesh together, right?
exactly what is the nature of all of this together? What are we
Right.
in, kind of thing. Yeah, it's just endlessly fascinating. Um, it's interesting having reading your Beyond Death book. I was like, holy crap! There's some events that happen in there that I mean, just blew me away, and I imagine they had the same effect on you. But can you talk a little bit about some of the manifestations you encountered while researching surviving death and how that impacted you in terms of your own personal belief system? I mean, you had a physical hand at one point materialize, and I think you were able to sort of, yeah, and then there was things that materialized into the room and just things that are outside the normal realm of human experience.
That's for sure.
So,
Yeah, that was
yeah,
that was in phys. I mean, there were a lot of different things throughout the book, but the ones you mentioned is probably the hardest thing for anyone to wrap their mind around, which is why I put it at the end. You
yeah,
know,
and I didn't mean to ruin your book. Sorry.
no,
Spoiler
no,
alert.
no, we
Spoiler
can
alert.
talk about it. I'm happy to. No, no, no. It's just I want people to understand that there was a lot that I wrote that led to this conclusion part of the book,
Yeah,
dealing with physical mediumship, that makes it easier to accept if you actually read the book and you get the history. I talked about some of the cases of this happening, 100 years ago, and scientists who had documented it and all of that kind of thing. So
yeah,
yeah, but there's nothing like personal experience, right?
right.
Um, and there is a medium in the UK. Physical mediumship is a type of mediumship where the medium goes into a trance state and is unconscious. And appears to be happening is that members of this kind of spirit team that are working through this medium will use that body to speak and to manifest things in the room. So I'm gonna the medium that I've been working with for over 10 years. His name is Stewart Alexander. He's in the UK. He's in his late 70s. He's been doing this for like 50 years. There's never been any issues with fraud or anything like that. He's done this in all kinds of circumstances and locations. And,
Yeah,
when I first spent time with him I think it was maybe 2014, 2015, my focus was on making sure it was legit. Absolutely no question about that. I'm not going to go into all the details of how I drew that conclusion, but it was clear. And then I had the experience of sitting with him in that room. And that's where, like you mentioned, what happens is he's in a trance. The spirit team, he has got 5 members of a spirit team. And I'm not going to keep saying allegedly or apparently. Let's just
yeah,
assume, well, this is true because in his world, this is what's happening.
yeah,
Um, there are 5 team members that he's been working with for decades and decades. They come through his body. Each one has a different voice. So he's unconscious, like he's asleep, right? And they're using his vocal cords to speak through him. And each one has a very distinct personality. And one of these entities is responsible, and they all have jobs that they do within the space. There's usually about maybe 8 people sitting together in a small space in a circle,
mhm,
mostly in the dark.
okay,
And I can explain why if you want me to. And there's one whose name is Walter, who's responsible for the physical manifestations in the room, which are, of course, for me initially, especially the thing I was most interested in, because you're witnessing it, and so is everybody else in the room, and there's no
yeah.
disputing what's happening. And one of the things,
It's just like with UFOs, the physical craft. It's like the thing that you can point to and say, that's real, so this is happening. It's like that first level of encountering the extraordinary. You want to be like, concretely, this is actual.
absolutely
So,
right,
yeah,
very good point. And what's amazing about this is it can be set up at a specific time and you know it's going to happen, and it's been observed by countless people over the decades, the very same thing, multiple people. But you can structure it to say, okay, and Monday at 7 o'clock we're going to have a sitting, and if you bring in a guest, it's very likely that these things are going to happen in there, and they do. You know,
Yeah.
it's not like with a UFO where you can say, okay, now the UFO is going to show up. So that's
Yeah.
what's one thing that's amazing to me about it. It's predictable, it's repeatable, multiple witnesses, all of that.
Yeah.
But it's so strange that I don't think the scientific world wants to touch it. But the other problem is that Stewart Alexander does not want to have scientists coming into the space, which is a very spiritual, personal
Yeah.
environment. He doesn't want the disruption that would occur.
Yeah.
And throughout history, he has studied the way physical mediums have been treated by science, which has not always been positive. So it's a whole dynamic around that. But just to get to what you brought up, one of the manifestations that occurs, I mean, one of them is, of course, physical objects levitating around the room, which is phenomenal to see in itself. They have this thing called a trumpet that flies around the room, and it'll touch your face very gently like that, even though it's in the dark. You can see the thing because it's lit up. But
Yeah.
it's unbelievable what it does. It responds to it, and voices come through it sometimes from this other world. But the hand, which you
But that was
mentioned,
provided. The trumpet was provided, right? It's in the
the
room when you
trumpet is
show up.
in the room. Yep, it's in the
Yeah.
room.
Okay.
It's a thing that is sort of a tradition in physical mediumship that they have these things called trumpets. They're cone shaped. They have a small opening like a megaphone.
Yeah.
Small
Yeah.
opening on one end, large opening on the other, and then he has illuminated a band on it so you can see where it is at all times. So when it's flying around the room, you can see it moving around. And through
Yeah.
the larger end, sometimes a voice will come through. This otherworldly voice from somewhere else. It's not from anybody in the room. It's just stunning to hear that. It's
Yeah.
coming from some kind of other realm. Um, and then one of the other things that happens is the physical materializations, which I can understand if people aren't going to accept it, but it's real. I've witnessed it multiple times, as have many others.
Yeah.
And the hand is one of them. Sometimes it's a whole body, but the hand is much easier thing for them to do.
Mhm.
Where the way it works is I'm sitting opposite the medium. There's a table in between us, and there's a substance which is called ectoplasm, which people can think is only from the Ghostbusters movies, but it's not. It's all throughout the history of physical mediumship. It's basically
Yeah.
an energy substance that is emitted from the body of the physical medium.
Yeah. And it
And
has sort of like fluid dynamics, kind of, right? Like it's amorphous, but then can take up form and structure, right? I mean,
exactly, it can be like anything from a mist to a rod that can lift a chair. It can
wow.
take, oh yeah, all these different shapes, and that somehow the spirituality, the entities working with it are able to shift its consistency somehow. I mean, it's unbelievable. That's all I can tell you. Uh,
Yeah.
but in the situation with the hand, you're actually sitting, and there's a table between me and Stewart, the medium, which is backlit, so it's got a red cloth over it and there's a light underneath it, so you can see everything on the surface of that table. And
Mhm.
this amorphous, like you said, it sort of looks like water, dark. It's all dark because it's backlit. You can see it coming over the surface of the table, and you can see it suddenly become physical. Like the way I saw it was many times, it sort of looks like this watery substance coming over the table, kind of moving towards me, right? And then then you start to see the shapes of fingers form from it. It's all pretty fast. You start to see these sort of rough shapes of fingers, forming. And then all of a sudden, the thing lifts up like this in a fist and bangs on the table with a loud thud. So
Oh
you
my God.
see, it's showing you that it's physical because
Yeah.
it started with nothing and
Yeah.
suddenly it's physical. And then the hand it withdraws again and it comes back in the same way. You see the ectoplasm come over, you see the hand form, and then my hand's over here at the other end of the table, and then that hand reaches out and I'm able to touch it and hold it and feel it. And I'm talking to the entity whose hand it is while this is
Hmm.
happening. So you follow the instructions very carefully because ectoplasm is a very sensitive thing. You don't want to you don't do anything that isn't safe.
Yeah.
There's an issue of safety for the medium. It's a very, very sensitive stuff. So anyway, I was able to feel, and this has happened again multiple times, feel that physically manifested hand from
How did
this
it feel?
person. Well, It's really fascinating, James. It's so one thing, it was very large, but extremely warm
Hmm.
and very soft. So the skin felt like a baby skin to me, like brand new skin. And I thought later that makes sense because this thing just materialized, right?
Materialized.
But
Yeah.
it felt absolutely like a normal physical hand. I mean, all the knuckles, the fingernails, the movement, everything about it. It was just like you were holding the hand of a physical person.
Well,
It
so
was,
now here, listen, if
yeah,
you're going to make that, if this is all fraudulent, right? I mean, and there's some physical way of getting a hand through the table or whatever, and it's like this color liquid. I mean, it's not going to feel like a regular hand when you finally get to touch it. I mean, there's going to be, it's like there's no way for it to take off the thing that would have made it look like fluid. There's just too many
it's
things going on.
impossible.
Yeah,
I mean, you can see it with your eyes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but I'm just
Everybody
saying,
in the room, their hands are not on that table.
yeah.
Right. And there was one time where they did it where everybody in the room put their fingertips on the very edge of the table. So,
Mm.
they've done all these experiments where you could see everyone's hands in the room and then the hand still materialized in the same way. Sometimes there have been a child's hand too that has materialized, a really small one. I mean, so I mean, there's just absolutely no way this could ever be produced fraudulently. And Stewart is not even up on, he can barely run a computer. He's not a
Yeah,
technological person. The group
yeah,
has been with him forever. They're simple, beautiful, working, Brits who just love doing this. I mean, there's absolutely no way. I ruled that one out pretty early on, that this could
yeah,
be fraudulent. So,
yeah.
and it is a physical hand. There's no question about it. It's just softer, warmer, and a little larger than maybe your normal hand, but otherwise, and I've touched it and felt it like this and held it, and then it just recedes off the table and it's gone.
Yeah.
Uh, it comes out of nothing and it disappears into nothing, but it feels like a normal human hand. So yeah, it's a pretty life-altering experience to have to
I
be able to.
can't imagine.
I mean, I
Yeah.
had read about it ahead of time, so I wasn't like one absolutely shocked. I'd read about it. I sort of expected it to happen because
Yeah, and you
Stewart,
went there to see something like that. So I mean, there's a
yeah,
preparedness, but still, I
there's
mean,
nothing like experiencing it. And his book, which is called An Extraordinary Journey, is a memoir that he wrote. It's really fascinating, and it describes, anybody's interested, it describes the
yeah,
evolution of how this all happened to him and how it all evolved and why he's doing it. And over decades and decades of time, it was a very slow progressing thing. So it's not easy to develop this kind of ability. But yeah,
and I should say his collection is now the Archives of the Impossible
that's
through
a
your
really
work.
important point.
Yeah,
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 and his whole collection with my assistance has been donated to the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University. And anybody, I recorded a video oral history with him because all the donors to the collection have oral histories.
mm,
On video, and you can go on the website and watch that, and you really get a sense of who he is and what he's doing. And we have at the end, we actually go into the seance room, which is the first time he's ever allowed that to be filmed, ever. To actually go into the seance room with me, I ask him, he shows the trumpets, he explains how they work. He has never done that before, so it's really an historic interview. So for
yeah,
anyone who's interested in knowing more about him and what he does, I recommend looking at that oral history on the Rice University website. Yeah.
yeah. And your book is obviously a source for a lot of this information. Um,
I just want to add that I'm deeply interested in physical mediumship. Very few people are. It's something I've studied a lot. I've studied the historical record in detail, and I know it's real. And although there were lots of frauds back in the 1920s and sort of the heyday of this, everybody thinks all of them were frauds, but they weren't. And
yeah,
this has been documented by some of our best scientists of the day who went under controlled conditions with these mediums and studied them and made records of what they were doing. And I
yeah,
reference all of that and I describe that in my book. So I just want people
yeah,
to know it's not like it's all bogus. If you go to
yeah.
Wikipedia, that's what it'll tell you, but it's not true.
And some of the things that cause people, this is what I was going to ask when I had the brain fade, was that some of the reasons why people think it's fraudulent or kind of hocus pocus or whatnot is because of things like the low light aspect. But do you explain why that's the case in the book? Because could you give our listeners a little bit of a explanation of there's practicality behind the choice to keep the lights dim. And what is that?
Exactly, yeah, which really mainly has to do with the ectoplasm, which is the substance exuded from the medium, which allows for a lot of the physical manifestations to occur. That substance is hypersensitive to light. And so there have been cases in the past of famous physical mediums where people who didn't believe, were trying to debunk them would come into a seance, somehow get in there, and they'd flip the light on suddenly. And the ectoplasm that was in the space, when that happens, it retreats very rapidly back to the body of the medium because it's being exuded from the medium, right? So it's like whipping back into the body because of the light. I don't know why. And
Yeah,
it can cause a lot of harm. It can damage and make the person very sick. One of medium actually died from it as a result of this. So, you have to be extremely careful. And basically, when Stewart goes into his trance state to do these sessions, he's putting his life in the hands of the spirit team and the people in the room to
yeah,
trust that the spirit team knows what's safe for him and what isn't. And there are lots of things that happen in that room where there is some light that's put on, especially if they don't involve ectoplasm. But they have to be so careful to protect him. That's a lot of what it's about. And the ectoplasm just doesn't work well in
yeah,
light. And
yeah,
that just happens to be a fact that we can't do anything about, but it certainly gives the debunkers lots of excuses to say, oh, they're cheating and they're hiding it in the dark or whatever. But if you study
yeah,
the whole history of mediumship, you understand this. Some mediums, however, did work with the light. Unbelievable. There are manifestations that would occur like this in the light.
yeah,
Stewart, when he began developing, he did it in the dark because he thought that would help manifest the phenomena. And so he became used to that. That was just how his particular path went.
yeah,
But that wasn't always the case in the past. And it's much
yeah,
harder today. I think there aren't as many physical mediums. It's harder for them to get manifestations than it was 100 years ago when they could operate more on the light. I don't know exactly why that is, except that
interesting.
Stewart has speculated a lot about that in his writing, why it's so different now than it was then. There's a lot of different factors, but there
Yeah,
have been cases where materializations have taken place consistently in the light, which
yeah,
are phenomenal to read about, and they're
yeah,
documented by trustworthy observers, basically.
yeah.
So
Now,
anyway, for him, that's how it works.
yeah. The question I have is I think sometimes people get confused between like spiritualism, which is a particular approach to some of these kinds of things. I mean, in terms of people, sort of getting information at least from this other realm, and what people are doing at these seances, they're not necessarily connected, right? I mean, like one is a sort of a almost a religious tradition, and another is just the mere performance of this ability that some people have. So they're not one for one, and you can't look at it what a spiritualist, the dogma of spiritualism, and say that it always applies to every person who's practicing mediumship. Is that correct?
True, yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think Stewart Alexander, to some extent, identifies with the realm of spiritualism, but he also sees lots of problems with it. So he's
Yeah,
not like a hardcore spiritualist.
yeah,
But he has, over all the decades, he's played various roles within that community. But basically, you're right. When you're in that room and things happen, it's just physical stuff happening in the moment. And it's not always physical. There's also another entity that connects sitters with loved ones who are deceased loved ones, and they will communicate, stuff like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It can be completely separated from any kind of religious framework or spiritualist framework when it's actually happening. And that's how
yeah,
I see it. That's how I see physical mediumship. I see it as just, uh, you know, something that happens as opposed to being part of some bigger religious framework.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It all depends on how the person chooses to relate to it, I think.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's a
Yeah.
part of what each person's journey is into this stuff is how are you going to relate to it? One of the things that I kind of I understand, but I also resent is that this comparison that people make, especially skeptics about the UFO religiosity. That if people are into UFOs are really interested, then they've kind of got caught up in this sort of, religious zeitgeist that's mounting with UFOs. And they now especially point to the focus on consciousness and sort of the paranormal as evidence. that everyone's losing their minds who are involved in the UFO subject. And it's hard because you are talking about something that's immaterial. You're talking about, sort of consciousness and being and these heavy philosophical topics. But it's not. I think one of the fundamental differences that I've recognized is people are asking the question, but they're not pretending to have the answers necessarily. And that's the difference between, it's like, it's not dogmatic teaching. We're not being told, well, if you believe in UFOs, then you've got to, accept the fact that A, B, and C are true. It's just like the conversation as a whole encourages you to encounter and sort of, think about these heavier subjects and come to your own kinds of conclusions. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you balance that? Do you ever think about that particular criticism of these subjects?
You mean about it being connected to some kind of religious fervor or something like that?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, yeah, I
and
mean, I just don't buy it because I don't relate to it that way. I'm very data oriented, but that doesn't mean that I'm not involved with the more high strangeness aspects of this. I just don't write about them in the New York Times, for obvious reasons, right?
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I don't. For me, I don't see it as some kind of religion or anything like that. But I know there are some people that probably do. They think that these beings from the sky are going to come down from the sky and save us. They're
yeah,
benign beings are going to save us, and they can sort of create that kind of energy around it. But I
yeah,
don't see it that way. But I
yeah.
think Diana Pasulka has talked about the fact that there is,
Exactly. I was just thinking that.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
religion around this, and that exists. I
yeah,
believe her. I think she's absolutely brilliant, and she's
yeah,
observed that, and that it does have those qualities. But that doesn't mean for everyone who's involved with it that it has those qualities. But
yeah.
there are certain people that perceive it that way, and if she's observed that, then it's out there. You
It's
know,
out there. It's interesting. It's like but I mean, I think that that can almost be true of anything. For one thing, I mean, people can make a religion out of all sorts of things, and also, I mean, the fact that this requires an assessment of what we're in, like we were talking about before. You're asking these huge questions that typically in the past have only really ever been addressed by religion. So there is this Venn diagram crossover that's happening.
right?
That's sort of for me helps make it even that much more fascinating, but then also can set off people's alarms who are immediately allergic to there being any kind of discussion around religion or meaning or God or any
Right.
of that.
And that's why I felt it was so important from day one when I wrote that first article in the Boston Globe 25 years ago, that I just have to focus on there is hard data that
Hmm.
shows we have physical craft out there that we can't explain. And don't
Yeah,
go beyond that, because anything beyond that, I would just lose anybody who was in a position of authority or who was skeptical about this. So
yeah,
yeah, you've got to, and I pretty much still do that in my reporting. It's
yeah.
just different aspects of it that come around, and I'm always hoping to be able to bring in, like, for instance, with the last story Ralph Blumenthal and I did for the New York Times, we were able to talk about crash retrievals.
Hmm.
But it's in a
Yeah,
certain context. It's still physical hardware that's being, acquired
yeah,
by programs or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's just very difficult to find a way to bring in the other elements that doesn't lose the focus of the people you're trying to reach or I'm trying to reach through my work.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
that's my particular job. I think other people have other jobs. Other
yeah,
people's jobs are to get that, like what Karen Olson is doing at Rice
mhm,
University, to get the
yeah,
other aspect of it attention in the right way. I mean, it's just not what I do, but it doesn't mean I'm not fully behind it.
yeah,
And I want to try to find a way to do it. So yeah, I mean, I stick with the hardcore data type stuff.
yeah,
And sometimes that's one reason why Ralph Blumenthal and I are really committed to trying to continue to write for the New York Times, even though it's very limited what they will accept for us to do.
yeah.
But nonetheless, we don't write about. I don't go out and write on Substack or somewhere else about more, you know,
Fringe
other
things. Yeah,
stuff, just to
yeah,
preserve that possibility of reporting for the Times. And I felt very nervous about my book Surviving Death, whether that would kind of kill that off,
hmm
with the Times. But it hasn't
That's
fortunately.
good. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
great.
I mean, but I took a risk in writing that book. I felt that at the time, but I could not, wasn't going to stop doing it just for that reason, you know? Because I
Yeah,
felt everything in that book was very scientifically backed. And,
yeah.
or my own experiences that I could just describe because I think people trust me as an objective witness to things. You know, I'm not going to be reporting on fraud.
Yeah.
So,
You're going to do the due
yeah,
diligence to figure out what's real and what's not, at least for
yeah, but
your
it
own. Yeah.
limits, it limits how if it that the reality of what I'm trying to do governs how much I can do publicly and in my reporting. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just a gradual evolution. But I mean,
Can I?
yeah, go ahead.
I was
Yeah.
just going to say that, like, you published the auras, the story in 2017, and that fucking blew up the world. Excuse my language, right? Everyone was like suddenly drawn into the subject in a real way, and there was, the government can no longer say we're not interested in UFOs, and that was just like huge. You is it your experience that the Times and other mainstream papers have gotten more allergic to the subject since then? Because I wonder, like with the I forget his name, Justin something, who was reporting for the Times for a while, had a very sort of skeptical view of things, and it seems like that they have been trying to keep a distance from the subject. Is that just perception from the UFO community, or do you feel that as well?
And you're
Because it
talking
seems
about
like
Julian Barnes, I think, right?
Julian Barnes, yeah,
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 who's their national security reporter. So my perception is that beginning in 2017, there was a period of years where the Times was very receptive to Ralph and I bringing them stories. The 2019 story we did on
Mhm.
the pilot sightings, which
Yeah,
featured Ben Graves, who had never really been known before. Now look where he's at.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
that story actually got more views than the 2017 story did. We found out later. I mean, that story, James, was so every year at the end of the New York Times tabulates from 1 to 100 their most read stories in order from 1 to 100. So
Hmm.
that story with the pilots was number 10. It was the 10th most read story in the New York Times for that year, of the year of 2019.
The
I
New
mean,
York
really, it
Times,
was the one
which
in 100, it was
is,
number 10, which is stunning, right?
yeah,
Um, I mean, and then after that, we did publish additional stories too. And I think what sort of turned the corner for the Times and maybe some of the other media was the Dave Grush story.
that's
When it,
what, yeah,
when it got to that,
yeah,
they did not want the story from us. And Ralph and I felt this is as big as 2017. We thought this was huge. The Times wouldn't go with it. And ever since then, I think it's been harder for the Times to publish on this topic.
yeah,
And they also, Julian Barnes has become, their staff reporter basically. So for them Ralph and I are freelancers, right? So that means
yeah.
we don't work for the Times. Every time
You
we have a
pitch,
story, we
yeah,
pitch it and it's a one-time thing. So
yeah,
when they have a staff that can cover things like congressional hearings or some of the stuff that's happening out in the world, they're not going to welcome hiring freelancers to do it. And
yeah,
so I think after the David Grush thing broke, they kind of were giving more stories to Julian Barnes, which is their prerogative to do.
sure,
And they just, it gets to be a little too far out, I think, after a while, because, Grush doesn't have what they quotes proof, no
yeah,
documents, no photographs, no quotes proof of what he was saying is true, even though he interviewed 40 people. I mean, I have no doubt that what he's saying is true, and I think he has incredible credibility. And Ralph and I were the ones that broke the story about David Grush, but we did it in
yeah,
the debrief.
yeah,
Um, so I think that was the turning point. We've
yeah,
gotten into some pretty much more weirder and kind of territory that they could label conspiratorial if they want,
mm,
territory for which there is no hard evidence, the way there is for pilots, the way there was for the ATIP program. We knew it
yeah,
was real. We knew the pilots that existed. We got radar. We've got
yeah,
reports that were filed, all this stuff. But with crash retrievals, we don't have that kind of backup. We just
yeah,
have what people say who are highly credible. And they're all
yeah,
saying the same thing.
yeah,
So I
exactly.
think
And they rank, yeah, they're highly ranked, yeah, they're just impeccable. But
that's right. But that's sort of the point where I noticed a shift both in the Washington Post and the New York Times It just doesn't rise to the standard that they require for
Yeah.
backing up something, a claim like this, which is so extreme as far as they see it, right?
Hmm.
If you can't back it up, they're just not going to go there. And
It
that's
seems like
really
it,
great. Yeah.
it seems like it coincided with the establishment and sort of the with Arrow sort of emerging. How much of that is a result of pushback from the forces within the government, and how much of it is just being, we'll go so far, but we'll go no further until, some concrete thing is presented.
I mean, I can't say for sure. I can only speculate on that, but I'm assuming that whatever forces are involved with the pushback, which will
Yeah,
be a number of people at the Pentagon who probably have relationships with members of the staff at the New York Times, definitely are going to influence their
yeah,
perception. I assume that. I assume that Arrow is going to influence their perception because they're very focused on the government authorities. They always want to know, what are the members of Congress saying? What are the government agencies saying about this? And that's what they take seriously at papers like the
yeah,
Times and the Post, right? So
yeah,
yes, these sources, these entities, these reports are going to have an impact for sure. I mean, I'm in no position to know to what extent, but
yeah,
that's clearly playing a role as well. And so you have the Arrow reports, you have other reports that are going to contradict or not. Arrow comes out and says we have no data for crash retrievals, we have no data for that anything's extraterrestrial or whatever. The Times takes that kind of thing very seriously.
yeah.
So,
and
and
they
that's
and they
how
have to maintain relationships with these. And that's the classic problem with media in the national security sphere, is that you have to maintain relationships with your sources also. So it's like there's a balance between what you think is the public good, but then also not having the door slammed in front of your face. So like
absolutely right, James.
trying to
Absolutely right.
keep that
You've
alive.
been in the business. You've been in the business.
Yeah,
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's
yeah,
just, and it makes it difficult, And I think more recently, Ralph and I, the reporting we've done for the Times has been in the arts section
mhm,
because these news stories are just too extreme for them right now, and they're just So we've been able to do two stories in the arts section in which we were able to bring in a lot of interesting information. It's like a door in for us, where we can
yeah,
run through the arts editors, and they have a different approach to the editing process than the news editors do. So in
yeah,
some ways, it gives us more freedom to say, like, so the one story we did was about Lou Elizondo's book Imminent, and then
mhm,
this past November we published a story on the Age of Disclosure, a private screening for Congress that was given, and the New York Times was we were the only reporters invited to this meeting, and I was able to be there, and Ralph and I covered the story for the New York Times about the congressional reaction to the Age of Disclosure. It was kind of a unique story. It wasn't just a review or something. I mean, in the
yeah,
context of that, we're able to talk about what they are saying in that movie.
mhm,
So we get the word out. But it's
yeah,
not a news story like 2017 or 2019 were in the news department. So
yeah,
that's kind of how we've been working lately. We don't know we're always looking for possible stories to pitch to the New York Times. We're always hoping to get more stories in there, and we just watch what's going on and do the best we can. But
yeah,
it's not like it was in the first few years after 2017. It's just not the same ever since the David Grush story came out.
yeah. It's interesting. I wonder. We were talking a little bit about the pushback, phenomenon. And I had an interview with Jay King a week ago or so, and we were talking about how sometimes experiencers get encounters with spooks, for lack of a better term, who can be at times threatening. I'm wondering if you've ever encountered any kind of situation with people who you didn't know where they were from, or they were obviously from intelligence agencies who've told you to back off, or ever made you feel threatened, or anything like that. Have you ever run up against that wall?
Absolutely never, zero. Never had
Okay.
anything like that happen to me ever.
Okay.
No, sometimes you're on a call with somebody on Signal and you might hear a little click and the person says, "Oh, this call's being monitored" or something. But I think it's them, not me, that's being
Yeah.
monitored. No, I've never had any threats or anything like that. Thankfully and
Yeah,
gratefully.
that's
Yeah.
maybe doing it with the journalist is something that they're more careful about, and that
I
would
think that
be
may be true. I really do,
Yeah.
because the more public the person is, the more risk there is for them that it will become known what they've done. But also, I'm not dealing with classified information. I mean, I'm not reporting stuff that's that sensitive. I'm
Yeah.
not, I mean, the David Grush story was pretty sensitive. But I don't know. Even on that one, uh,
He faced the pushback, but you didn't get caught up in that.
exactly. It's the
Yeah.
sources that get the pushback, and I'm not reporting on anything that I shouldn't be reporting on, or even sometimes on things that aren't out there anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ryan Gray story was when we did it in 2019. I mean, there was some stuff out there. He had done an interview for the History Channel. It just wasn't at the level of the New York Times,
Hmm.
but it wasn't like, and we had new stuff in there and we had new interviews and stuff, but it wasn't like there'd be any reason for anyone to threaten me for a story like that. So
Yeah.
much of it is just when the New York Times carries something, it has a certain level of credibility like nothing
It's
else.
yeah, it's the paper of record for the country.
Yeah.
It's like now
And
it's real.
no matter what the information is that's being presented, if it has to do with this topic, it's going to be a big deal just because it's the New York Times. It's more that than I think it is that we're breaking anything really risky or sensitive that anybody's going to threaten us about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't feel like I'm a particular risk to anyone. I mean, I know a lot of stuff off the record, but so do a lot of other people, and I don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So there's no reason for me to be threatened, I don't think. It's really the sources, as you say, those are the ones that are at risk, and those are the ones we have to be really protective of. And I think one of the things that's going to be coming more in the future is better legislation to protect these whistleblowers who want to come forward. It seems to
Yeah.
be a major focus now for the members of Congress who care about this topic, and there's a group of them that really are really passionate about it. They're very focused on greater protections for whistleblowers and sources who want to come forward with information that they're afraid to come forward with. They should be able to go into Congress under classified, in a protected classified environment and say whatever they want. And they're afraid to do that. And so, yeah, so anyway, they're the ones at risk. And Congress is very focused on trying to find ways that they can become better protected so that they can provide information to members of Congress, and eventually that information can be provided to the public to
Yeah.
whatever extent it's not a national security concern. So that's something that hopefully is going to get better in the future. But I don't
But,
know.
yeah, making that transition into like the sort of the political situation. Once again, the Disclosure Act, kind of got weeded out at the last minute. I think some aspects of new legislation did get included in the National Defense Authorization Act, but is the Disclosure Act as a body, do you think that that era has now passed? Or do you think it's something that will come up again? Is there another effort emerging out of the ashes, so to speak, sort of um, a 2.0 version of something that may have a better chance of success? What are you hearing on all
Yeah,
that?
I do think that I don't think it's the end. I don't think it's going to be buried in the ashes. I mean, there's other legislation that is being worked on, and there may be a new version of the UAP Disclosure Act.
Hmm.
Then maybe they'll tone it down, give it a different name. I don't know because it's just still the beginning of the year, and that tends to happen towards the end of the year
Yeah,
if it's part of if it's an amendment to the NDAA. But I don't think these people are giving up. I think it's just a matter of over and over again they're going to do the best they can to get what they think will pass passed.
yeah.
And so, yeah, that's my sense. There will be other versions of other legislation that will be put forward this year.
Mhm.
And these members of Congress are just totally committed to this. I mean, I would just want to let, people need to know it seems slow, but there is so much that goes on behind the scenes. We have a group of House members who are dedicated to this, to change, to transparency, to uncovering what's going on. It's
Mhm.
bipartisan, and they deserve all our support because they're really, really working hard. It takes a lot of work to do something that seems fairly small to us.
Yeah,
When you're operating within the halls of Congress, it's not easy. So I have complete faith that they are not dropping this ball, and more is going to happen. And
yeah,
they'll just do the best they can. I mean, yeah, they're up against a lot of opposition always, right?
Yeah.
So they do the best they can, but it's going to evolve. I really believe that, and more is going to happen, and people can expect that.
I've heard reporting recently that McConnell was one of the main opponents to the passage of the Disclosure Act. Is that something that you've heard as well, or is it more widespread than that?
Then you mean to opposition of it or
Yeah, the
passage?
opposition of it, that he was
Yeah,
one of the main champions against it.
I mean, I've heard that too, and I've heard of others. But again, I don't have an inside track on that.
Okay.
I only know what everybody else knows about that, which is what people read. I don't know for sure, but
Yeah.
clearly there was strong opposition, or more would have happened.
Yeah.
I know there's been some conversations about possibly those opposing it have connections to the aerospace corporations, certain aerospace corporations who might have a vested interest in.
Yeah, especially with the Congress people last year, some of the people in the Intelligence Committee, they were
All right. Well, they
definitely.
may have a personal interest in protecting the design, the aerospace companies from having to release anything, or so they may have to adjust the legislation to make it passable, which means tone certain things down, change certain things, and just pass what they feel is feasible to pass. Which
Yeah.
I think, I guess it's sort of focused more on transparency, on the release of documents from the National Archives. I mean, that kind of thing seems to be able to be okay. But it's when you get into the more things like eminent domain and people turning over their materials to the government and some of the other stuff that's just not palatable yet. But
Yeah.
so they're just going to have to adjust themselves to
Yeah.
what's workable.
Achievable. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
exactly right. Yeah.
Exactly. Eventually we'll get there. I
Yeah.
hope. I think it's just a slow process.
Well, we've been making progress pretty steady. So, I mean, I know it's not what everyone hopes for, but I think that the progress has been obvious. Um,
Yep.
I mean, we're coming up on the time. I wanted to ask you real quick, what are you watching out for in the coming months in terms of your own interest, projects that you're excited to see develop, and anything else you want to point toward that people should be keeping their eye on, in this broader subject area?
Wow. Well, I do think what we've been talking about, which is the actions of the congressional world, are very important in the legislation that might come for people to let their representatives know that they care about this topic. I think more members may come on board with this.
Hmm.
So we're definitely going to be watching for that. I mean, I think that the James Fox documentary, the revamp of the age sorry, moment of contact,
On
which
contact.
just came
Yeah.
out, is really a pivotal moment, a pivotal case that I think could, you know, create a lot of change. A lot. I mean, I recommend that everybody watch that. It's on streaming on Amazon Prime. Be sure you watch the new version because what's
It's
really
already streaming.
it's already streaming, right?
I
And
didn't realize that. I thought it was coming
yeah,
out. So,
I
Moment
know.
of Contact, the
No,
new
it's
version is out
streaming.
now.
It's out. It came out in late December, and I think it went out globally just very recently. And
Okay.
on Amazon Prime. There are new witnesses, new revelations in that film that are just extraordinary, and it really is making a strong case because it involves the witnessing, the interactions with live aliens. And for lack of a better word, I hate the word aliens, live, non-human intelligent beings, right?
Yeah.
In hospitals, you have medical doctors, pathologists, neurosurgeons talking about it. These are not people they're very highly credible, significant people who have, and dozens of witnesses have been involved with this case. And James has been working on it for decades. And
Yeah.
so, if you can't argue with reports of a live non-human being, it's kind of kicking the whole thing up a notch. We're not just dealing
Exactly.
with crashed technology. And yes, Grush and others have always made the connection between what we call biologics and crash retrievals. But what's interesting to me about the James Fox movie is it's something concrete that makes that connection, right? It's
Mhm.
documented. It's not classified. It's a case in which there was a crash and then there were live beings that were well documented, that were captured by the military, that were taken to hospitals, and eventually were taken away by the United States.
Yeah.
So it's an extremely well documented case. So I just love the fact that we may get, more attention on the sort of biologic side of this as a result of his film,
Yeah.
and other efforts that are going to be taking place around that.
Yeah.
which we'll see over the next few weeks. And just to say that I think what's important about the biologics is the argument can be made that release of information about the biologics is not a national security concern. These are studies that have been done on tissue or whatever, or
Hmm.
bodies, right? You
Yeah.
can't argue the way you can argue with technology that it affects national security. Obviously, we don't want the Russians and Chinese to understand the technology that we've reverse engineered or created, right?
Yeah, exactly. It could be
They're
weaponized or
not
whatever. Yeah.
different. This is just
Yeah.
a body that exists of a non-human being, and it is absolutely proof that we're not alone, and it's proof that is not a threat to national security.
Exactly. It's like the nut of the question, really. I mean, that's like sort of like in terms of are we alone or are we not? I think that it goes right to the heart of it.
And the argument can be made in petitioning the government for, and once we can get it to a credible level, the biologics,
Hmm.
one can make the argument that this should be revealed because the normal argument that's used, which is national security, doesn't apply here. So
Yeah.
what is going to be the argument for withholding that information? And what I love about the Virginia case that James has documented is it's sort of a springboard into that level of inquiry because
Hmm.
it's a documented case of live living beings that so it takes it to that into that world to me as I see it in a very credible way, and it
Yeah.
might allow us to ask new kinds of questions regarding the release of biological information if we can't release technological information.
Yeah.
So I'm very fascinated by that as being sort of a possible unfolding narrative that'll happen over the next year. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm very interested in that. And there is going to be some interesting developments that will occur around that case over the next year. So
Okay.
yeah,
Exciting.
yeah, it's very exciting to me. I think it's exciting. Yeah, and so you just take things as they come. I've also co-authored a play that I'm trying to get produced. Which deals with the existential ramifications of disclosure and a bunch of characters who have to confront that. So I'm also
Yeah.
working very hard on trying to get that out into the world.
Exciting.
Yeah,
Let us know when that happens and you can give us some information because we'll promote the hell out of it.
I hope it happens. It's very hard to produce a play in New York City, which is where we're trying to do it. But we'll see. We've got great producers working with us, so myself and my co-author. So we'll see where it goes. It's a slow
It's only
process.
the number one media market in the whole world, so I don't know what would be so hard.
Really competitive to produce theater. It's
Yeah.
very tight community, and there's so much competition, so many
Yeah.
great playwrights. To even get
Yeah.
your play read by the right people is a challenge.
Yeah.
So we're working on it. But that's one thing that really inspires me and excites me about this coming year is trying to
Yeah.
work on that. So
And
and
something
it's
creative too.
still on the pike, huh?
Yeah. Something creative too, which
I love the creativity. It's the only nonfiction work I've ever done in this field. And it's all based on reality. It's based on real people, based on a scenario that to some extent has happened and certainly could happen. So it's reality based, but it's still fiction.
yeah.
And because I'm writing it with a theater actor and a theater person and a playwright. The combination of our skills have merged to create this really interesting thing, interesting play as far as I'm concerned. So, but I had to learn a lot about the art of playwriting in order to do it from the
Yeah.
guy, my co-author William Humans, who's an accomplished theater actor and writer. So, yeah, it's been a really really fun process to do.
Yeah. Journey.
And I haven't talked about it much because I don't like to talk about things before they happen.
Yeah.
But I can't restrain myself because I'm excited about it. So here you go. Here you go.
Well, that's all I got for you, Leslie. I really appreciate it. This has been a fantastic conversation, everything I hoped. So I
I'm
appreciate
so
you.
glad, James, and I appreciate you having me on. And again, happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
This will probably air after your birthday's over, but today is your birthday. So
Yeah. And I'll just preserve it forever. And the people can always come back and celebrate my 50th again.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's great.
Yeah.
So thank you very much it was a wonderful conversation. Flew by really fast.
It did. It
Because
did.
you're involved and interested in something, and I just am grateful for the dialogue. And you ask great questions, and thank you for all the thought you put into this.